Hey everyone, it's Cindy Lawrence. I'm here with a Copic coloring video to share with you today. I'm going to be using stamps from Power Poppy. The first one is Bloomin' Wonderful. We're using the bouquet in the corner. And the second stamp set is Geraniums Take Two using the Best Wishes stamp. I've already die cut all of the pieces for the card, and most of those dies are from MFT stamps. I'm going to begin by coloring my bouquet. I'm going to start with the crocuses using BV00 as my base color on each of the crocuses. So I'm just putting a quick coat of color down on each petal, and I am leaving a little bit of white space. So very light touch with this first coat because it's such a small area, and I do want to leave some white as well. The paper that I'm using here is Express It blending card, and the ink that I stamped my image in is Memento Tuxedo Black. I use those quite a bit. So there are 5 crocuses on this image, and I've colored them all with my base coat of BV00. My mid-tone color is BV02, so I'm putting a little bit less of that color down than I did the first color. Very light flicks here. Putting a little extra on the inside of the flowers. It'll be a little darker, more in the shadow there. And just blending along each petal. My shadow color is going to be BV04. So I stuck with a natural blending group here, BV00, 02, and 04. When you're choosing colors, it really helps to pick a natural blending group, especially if you're new to Copics. So just pick 3 colors that are just a couple of numbers away from each other. If you choose numbers that are too close, like a 1, 2, and a 3, you may not get enough contrast in your image. And again, that really depends on the color family. You need to experiment a little bit to see how they all work together. So with the BV04, I'm putting less of that color than I did of my BV02. And now I'm going to throw an additional color in here. This is B24. I wanted to have a little bit of blue tone in there as well, so I thought it would be fun to mix the blues and the blue violets together. The last thing I'm going to do to each of these crocuses is come in with my BV02 and then my BV00 and do a little bit of blending. If I go over that B24 with the blue violet, it will tone it down a little bit. So now I'm going to use BV00 to soften some of the lines that I have created in there. Just blending out very lightly. You can see I'm not spending a lot of time on this, just doing a little bit of softening, and I'm still leaving some white space on the flowers. Once I've done that, now I will go in with my 0, my colorless blender, and go over where those white spaces are and just soften the edge of the color where it meets the white. This gives it a nice soft fade to white look, so there are no hard edges. I could come back in when it's dry and add some nice white streaks there if I wanted to. Now I'm going to move on to the stems and leaves. The color I'm starting with here is YG61. I'm using that as my base green, finding where all those little leaf parts are. Sometimes you miss a few when you're doing an image that is this detailed and you have to go back in and find them. So I'm just finding all those thin little leaves. Now I have found as I've gotten older that my hand is just not as steady as it used to be. So some of these real fine detail pieces are harder to stay in the lines. If you feel like it's too hard to get all the way out to the tips, don't do it. You're welcome to just leave it a little bit white there at the end. It'll just look like a highlight. So I'm using YG63 as my mid-tone color on the leaves. and I'm adding a little bit of shading in there to the underneath leaves, some of the areas that would more likely be in shadow, coming out from behind a flower or another leaf. So just going back, adding a little bit here and there. And then my final color will be YG67 on these leaves. That's a pretty dark one, and I'm really going to concentrate that in my shadow areas. So anywhere where I feel like there might be a little bit of shadow, again coming out from underneath a flower, underneath another leaf. If you want to make one leaf set back from the other, then make that one darker. Use a darker shade on the one that's behind. So again, little bits here and there. And once I have added my dark color to all of the leaf areas that I want to, I'm going to go back in with my lightest leaf color, which was YG61, and I'm going to just lightly blend that out. And you want to do that very carefully, because if you put too much ink down while it's still wet on a real thin area like this, it's going to want to start to push outside the lines. So really quick, just right where those colors meet, I'm adding a little bit of blending there just to get rid of any harsh lines that I'm seeing. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do is some of these little pussy willow branches. I'm going to use my E33 marker in the earth tone set anywhere I see branches, and I'm just going to color those little bits in a brown. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's a branch, what's a leaf stem. Make it up as you go along. No one's going to know the difference. You're in charge. And then I'm adding a little bit of a darker shade, which is my E37, to some of the areas that would be more in shadow, coming out from behind a pussy willow or another flower or the ribbon or another stem, just to give it that little bit of dimension. The last thing I want to do is any of the parts of this image that I want to leave white, I still want to add a shadow to them. One of my favorite shadow colors is BV20. So on each of the pussy willows and the snowdrops, I'm adding just in the shadow areas a little bit of BV20. And then I'm going to come in with my 0, my colorless blender, and very quickly and lightly soften the edge where the color meets the white, so it doesn't have hard lines. Sometimes you want hard lines, sometimes you want it to be a little bit softer. All right, now this is where, once my leaves have dried, if I had any spots where I went outside the lines, I went back with my colorless blender and I just very carefully cleaned up those edges. You want to do just a little bit and let it dry, and then you can come back to that same area again and do just a little bit more. It's a lesson in patience. So often we want to rush this process and you just make a bigger mess when you do that. Now I'm going to add some background to really make this image pop. I'm using E50 and I'm just lightly flicking around the image in all those little white space areas. And I'm not being so picky that I'm going to go completely around the whole thing. What happens when you do that is you kind of create a line around the whole thing. So I just want it to be a little bit irregular and a little bit soft. And then I turn the image upside down so that I could flick in the direction that works best for me. I flick the best away from myself. So I'm just filling in some of those little areas in between all the little leaves and pussy willows and flowers, and just putting some light color in there. And again, I didn't go around the whole image perfectly. I don't want it to look like I drew a line around it. Now I'm coming in with my colorless blender and I'm blending out the edges. The E50 is a very light color, so you may not feel you even need to do this with that color. I do it just to soften any lines that are there. Next, I have my E53, which is a little bit of a darker shade than the E50. And I'm going in a little deeper, just into the nooks and crannies, real close to the image, giving it a little extra depth. You could even go a little bit darker if you wanted to behind there. And then it's fun to add some random dots of this darker color around there. It gives it a little more of a natural background look. It's kind of a fun technique to do, and it's very freehand. You're not making perfect polka dots. We don't want that. We want it to look natural. So just make them random, and then I come back in with my lighter color and I go right over the top of some of the dots that I just did, and what that does is it acts very much like the colorless blender because it's a lighter color than the one I just used, and it softens all of those dots. So the last thing I'm going to do here is go in with my E53 one more time and just really crisp up some of those shadow areas and make it a little bit deeper. The more times you go over your image with the marker, the darker it will be. So I'm just really doing it very much in the center area. Helps that pop off the page. And that's it. That image is colored in full, and there it is on the completed card. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below, and have a wonderful day.